Hey guys, welcome to my first drive video on this facelifted Audi S8. I actually had the pre-facelift model on the channel about 2 years ago, and I remember stating, in fact, in the title of that video, saying it was the best Audi in their current lineup. Now, they haven't made that many changes, to be fair, and we'll run through them shortly. But something else I was really keen to look at was their pricing, because 2 years ago, a base model S8 would have cost you just under £100,000. I think it was £99,700. And that particular press car that I had back then, it only had one option, which was a sunroof, and that brought up to about £101,000, which again is a lot of money. But when you're talking about how much car you get and performance and luxury you get, I think it was really good value. Well, I'm glad to report that even with all of the car pricing madness that we've experienced over the past 12 to 24 months, the new S8 in base trim form still retails at £102,000 on the road. Although that's still a lot of money, I think that represents really good value, especially when you compare it to its competitors. Well, except it doesn't have any competitors at the moment, because there is no S63 Merc, and even when there was a few years ago, well, that car was about £35,000 more expensive. There is also no combustion engine only high performance 7 Series. Oh God, that thing's really not a looker, is it? I haven't had one on the channel yet. I don't think BMW are in too much of a hurry to send me one, but even if they made like a 750i or something, I suspect that that would be £120,000, £125,000 upwards. So the S8 in this segment really does represent amazing value. What is exactly new about this facelifted S8? Well, they've redesigned the front bumper, and in fact, the front grille is slightly bigger, a bit wider at the bottom, because they didn't want BMW getting all of the grille limelight. They've also redesigned the front headlamps. I mean, Audi headlamp units have always been a thing of beauty, and these new ones are incredible. And in fact, the ones that are fitted to this particular car are standard on the flagship Vorsprung model, and they're called Digital Matrix LEDs. They actually have 1.3 million micro mirrors in them. So I expect they'd be very good adaptive headlamps. I haven't really had the opportunity to try them, although I've had this car for almost a week, because we're at the end of June. It doesn't get dark till nearly 10 o'clock here in the UK. So I've only had a couple of darkish evenings in this car, and they seem to perform very well, as you'd expect with all that technology and all of those mirrors. And once we get around the back of the car, you probably guessed it already, we have redesigned rear lights. You can see we have this light bar that runs all the way around the boot itself, and the main rear light units house OLED technology. They look really good and bang up to date, but it doesn't look radically different. And I think that's sort of main thing with the A8 or the S8 in general. It's never been a car that sort of shouts about what it does. It always flies under the radar. It's very, very classy. And this facelifted model is absolutely no different to that whatsoever. I love the fact that this car almost has 600 horsepower. We'll get onto the engine very soon, but you wouldn't really know it. It's very subtle, especially in this Daytona grey. I'm not the biggest fan of the black wheels with this car, because I think they look a little bit small, but would you believe it? These are 21-inch wheels. To me, they look like they're about 18 or 19 inch. There are a few telltale signs though. Obviously we have the quad exhaust pipes around the back, and we have a couple of subtle S8 badges, but you just wouldn't know until this car fires up. There is one more change that they've made to the facelifted S8, and I'm going to demonstrate that now. You see, these run on air suspension, so obviously they can self-level and adjust up and down depending on how much weight, etc. you've got in the car and which mode you're in. But they've managed to utilize that air suspension to a greater effect for your everyday life. I'll demonstrate that right now. I come around here to get into my S8. I open the door. Watch that. Yeah, the car lifts itself by a good 3 or 4 inches, which means getting in and out of the car is a lot easier. and a lot more like getting in and out of your Q7 or your Q8. I really like that feature. At first it kept taking me by surprise, but I do like it, and in practice it really works very well. When you close the door, soft close doors, and you lock the car back up, it will slowly drop itself back to its normal ride height. Under the bonnet we find the S8's heart, and it's a big powerful heart. It's a 4-litre V8 twin turbo, essentially the same engine we find in Audi's RS6 and RS7. Produces a detuned 571 horsepower, but the full fat 800 newton meters of torque. In fact, 800 newton meters of torque is more than cars like the M5 Competition. It's more than the M5 CS, in fact, and it's that torque figure that you really need to throw your big heavy saloon down the road. This is connected to the familiar ZF 8-speed gearbox, and obviously then through Audi's Quattro all-wheel drive system. When you add all of that together, well, Audi claim this will do the 0 to 62 sprint in just 3.8 seconds. 3.8 seconds for a luxury limo that's over 5 meters long and well over 2 tons in weight. I mean, that's just crazy. And we will test that with the race box very soon. Jumping in here, it all seems very familiar. I can't see any updates whatsoever. Maybe the graphics and the layout of the virtual cockpit have been slightly improved, but to me everything else seems very, very similar to the pre-facelift. It's a very nice cabin, this, especially this particular press car. It has an Audi exclusive interior package, which I believe is about £9,000. Not sure if you can spec it at the moment because of shortages of everything, but it just means Alcantara basically everywhere, all over the headlining, the door cards, etc. And this beautiful leather with contrasting stitching and piping just feels very expensive in here. They even have red seat belts, which normally I wouldn't be the biggest fan of, but I think they go very well with the Daytona grey exterior. So although on the outside it's almost fairly ordinary, when you jump in here it's definitely not. But focusing on changes, as I say, there's not really much going on in here. All of this touchscreen stuff from Audi still looks very modern, and I wouldn't say it's aged badly. I've never been the biggest fan of it for reasons that you can hopefully see maybe on camera at the moment, all the dust and the fingerprints. I cleaned this just before I left to come out here this morning, and it's covered in stuff already. So you always need to have a microfiber cloth or something at hand just to give it a wipe over, because it just always looks so grubby. And when you do wipe it over, it tends to change screen and do whatever else you don't want it to do. So that's a little bit frustrating. It does now have a voice control system, a bit like BMW and Mercedes, but in reality, I don't know how many people use that. I certainly don't. I much prefer to do everything manually where possible. This particular car, well, it has a head-up display, it has rear entertainment as well, and in fact, even rear, I think they call them comfort seats, electrical rear seats essentially, that recline and adjust just like the front ones do. I'm not sure, once again, if that is currently available on the configurator because things are changing all the time, but this particular press car definitely has that, and there's a lot of luxury going on. In terms of the rear entertainment, I think it's about a £4,000 option, and personally I would steer away from that because it kind of eats into the rear cabin space, especially on the regular wheelbase, which this car is. Maybe in your A8 long that you use for chauffeuring, and then you have your rear entertainment and it's fine because there's a lot more space back there. But in this particular car, I'll get rid of the screens. I think they also look a little bit ugly compared to the rest of the cabin. In terms of its competitors, like the new S-Class or the new 7 Series, it's not as futuristic and there's not as much tech in this particular car, and that's because fundamentally underneath this is a 4-year-old model, whereas the S-Class and the 7 Series have just come out. So this might be slightly older than the others, but what you get for the package, it represents much better value than the S and the new 7. First thing I think we should do is test out this S8's acceleration figures. Audi claim it will do the 0 to 62 sprint in just 3.8 seconds. I have my Racebox Mini ready to go on my dashboard, and I have my Racebox app ready to go on my phone down here, so hopefully that camera is picking that up reasonably well. I've got all of the traction control devices switched off because remember we have Audi's all-wheel drive Quattro system and conditions outside are close to perfect. Put that over into sports automatic. Left foot is hard down on the brake, right foot hard down on the accelerator. Boost is building, boost is ready, here we go. And there we go. 3.44 seconds. 3.44. I think that's almost identical to what I timed the pre-facelift car. I think that was 3.4 dead. And this car's got a lot more optional extras. So that's the added weight. And there's your 0.5 of a second or whatever it is. That's massively, massively impressive. Let's go and see what it's like on a typical British A or B road. I get most press cars like this one for a week, and during that time I like to use it as much as possible so that at the end of the week, today when I film it, I can feed back as much information and knowledge as possible. The problem with that in this day and age is it simply costs too much in fuel. Yes, I've been using this car as my daily. I've been using it to go to the shops and back. I used it to go to the Bicester Scramble over the weekend, but I haven't been using it excessively just to test the car because I simply can't afford to keep refueling it. A tank of fuel in this car is going to cost you circa £150. And although YouTube now makes me a living, it definitely doesn't make me enough money to basically go out and run this car for the sake of running it. But during my week with this car and those journeys that I've done with it, I have learned a lot about it. And there's one thing that springs to mind, and that is comfort and ease. It just does everything with so much ease and so much comfort. I really have enjoyed sitting here and being able to use this car as my daily, even if it was taking it down the road to my local co-op, which is literally a mile away. I know that's lazy, but it's those little journeys where you sometimes learn a lot about a car. And the air suspension that sits up and allows you to get in and out of, at first I didn't like it. It was a surprise. I wasn't ready or expecting it, so didn't particularly like it. But now 7 days in, I absolutely love it, and I can't imagine it not doing it when I go to get in the car and having to stoop down those extra 3 or 4 inches. While we're talking about suspension, well, the ride quality, as you'd expect, is mind-blowing. Remember, we're on 21-inch wheels in this car. I think you can get it on 19s, which is what the base S8 comes on, and then 20s maybe for the black edition and 21s for the Vorsprung. Don't quote me on that. But even with the biggest wheel option and the smallest sidewall tyre option, the ride quality is amazing. I'm in Comfort Plus at the moment, and it's just floating along one of my favourite roads. You'd kind of expect that because of the air suspension, and you'd expect it because Audi and their air suspension in general been really good over the years. And although when you're pushing on, sometimes it feels a little bit artificial, when you're using it for, let's say, a limo or comfort, it's just lovely. And in fact, this particular car, or the S8, comes standard with predictive air suspension. Or is it called predictive adaptive air suspension? Anyway, whatever it's called, it comes standard with it. And what that means is when you're approaching something like a pothole or a speed bump, there are cameras and lasers and all sorts on the front end of this car that basically anticipate that. So as you approach a speed bump, it's seen the speed bump, and it basically tells the air suspension what to do in order to make the car or keep the car as flat and stable as possible. Something else that makes this car very easy to live with is its four-wheel steer. So the rear axle steers in an opposite direction to the front axle at slower speeds, and it steers in the same direction as the front axle at higher speeds. And what that means is, again, when you're in town or in a city, where you're trying to do a three-point turn or a maneuver that would normally be quite difficult in a car that's this size and this long, it just makes light work of it. It's really easy to turn around. In fact, I'll demonstrate here at this small junction. There's nothing behind and there's nothing coming in front. Full lock, and I can just feel it pivoting as the rear wheels turn in the opposite direction to the front. Just makes this car feel like it's more of a hot hatch size and not something the size of an A8 or an S8. And that's really helpful around town. And also, as you get faster, as we talked about, and the rear wheels turn in the same direction as the front axle, it makes the car feel really stable and, again, lighter and smaller than it actually is. And I think that's almost a must-have on bigger cars these days. Before we get to the dynamic driving stuff, I just want to point out a few negatives, shortfalls that I've found with this car in the time that I've had it. The first one, and it seems to be a bit of a common issue with any Audis that have this dashboard layout, there's been a rattle in this dash. It's not always there, but it does come and go, and it's a little bit frustrating. If you've got the radio on, you don't hear it. If you're pushing on, you don't hear it because the V8 sort of drowns it out. But if you're just cruising along like I am now, you occasionally hear it, and it's definitely coming from the dashboard somewhere. It's not the first Audi with this layout that I've experienced that with, and I just don't think that's acceptable on anything sort of premium and German, let alone something like this that's over £100,000. You do sometimes get it in the sunroofs with Audi as well, but thankfully this one doesn't have any creaks or rattles from up there, but it has only done 3,000 miles, so we just don't know. The other slight negative is the rear cabin space. Like I said, I wouldn't bother going for rear entertainment if you're in a standard wheelbase A8 or S8, because although it's not tight or small back there, those screens do eat into your available space, and they make it feel like it's a lot smaller and tighter than it potentially is. We've talked about fuel consumption. I'm not going to say that's a negative, because this is a blisteringly fast super saloon, so you're not expecting it to give you 40 or 50 miles to the gallon back. And actually, when you're cruising along, this 4 litre has a cylinder deactivation mode, so if you're not labouring the engine, it will shut down a bank of cylinders, and it will actually give you 30 odd miles to the gallon on a long run, 70-75 miles an hour on the motorway. So it's not horrendous, but when you are booting it, it is. But like I said, that can't be a negative, because what would you expect with a car this big, this heavy and this fast? I'm now in dynamic, and the first thing you're going to notice is glorious V8 engine sound. Also, that adaptive air suspension, it's a lot firmer now. It's still very plush. It still does its job very well in terms of absorbing bumps and potholes, but the whole car just feels so much more supported, especially through twisty bits like this. Grip and the pace that this car has, it defies physics. And I remember thinking that about the pre-facelift car, because fundamentally they're the same thing underneath. And 2 years later, I mean, it still puts a smile on my face. It still surprises me. It feels dynamically 95% as good as an RS6 or an RS7. That's how good this car is, genuinely. We know it's as quick in a straight line, and in fact, I think Matt Watson did a drag race a couple of years ago, and the S8 was slightly quicker for the traditional drag race anyway than his long-term RS6. So there's no denying that it's as fast, if not a fraction quicker, in a straight line. But also in the twisties, it's relatively good fun, especially when you step away from this car and you look at it and you just can't imagine, you can't understand how such a ordinary, let's call it luxury limo, can be so exciting down one of your favourite twisty small British B roads. It just doesn't make any sense, and it stops really well as well. This isn't on carbon ceramics. I believe they are an option on the Vorsprung model. Don't quote me on that again, because specs just keep changing day by day, week by week, but the steels do a very good job of stopping this absolute weapon. That never gets old. I need to come up with some kind of conclusion. 2 years ago, I said that the S8 was the best Audi on sale back in 2020. Does this car live up to those expectations, and is it still the best car that Audi sell as far as I'm concerned? Well, it does still live up to those expectations. As we talked about, it's essentially the same car with a couple of improvements, and they're good improvements, so yeah, the car hasn't got any worse. But what has happened in the last 2 years is Audi have launched their current RS3, and it's no secret how much I love that particular car. It has its shortcomings. The interior is not particularly brilliant. You certainly don't get this lovely exclusive leather, and doesn't feel anywhere near as premium as this particular car. But as a driver's package, and that's what I look for in a car, the RS3 is brilliant. And along a road like this, although the S8 is amazing, it's no match on the RS3. So for me, the current best Audi in their lineup is the RS3, but I'd have to say that the S8 is a very close second, and it sits right up there with cars like their RS6, because as far as I can tell, it pretty much does everything that that car does, yet offer you more luxury at a bit less cost, which, yeah, I still can't get my head around today. So hats off to Audi for still producing such a ridiculous super saloon or super limo, whatever you want to call it, in this day and age. If I won the lottery tomorrow, I'd probably go out and buy one of these just to waft around in, and if I did find myself on one of my favourite roads like this one, I could put it into dynamic, pull a paddle, and actually have a bit of fun, which just, like I said, doesn't seem possible when you look at this car on the outside. Let's just enjoy this bit of road. Love that sound. Brakes are good, so stable. The air suspension just deals with everything so well. The compression, lovely. A big truck coming the other way, no worries. The placement of this car, although it's big and it has a massive footprint, it's a very nice and commanding driving position, so you very quickly get used to where the corners of the car are, and it's very easy therefore to place it on a very small typical English road like this one. Just give you another V8 sound just because we've got a little bit of fuel left. It's not going to last though, is it? Just plows over the bad sections of road. Really is a freight train, this thing. It's a twin turbocharged freight twain. See, it even makes my words go funny. Take it easy guys, cheers.